This video will explain how to do cursors in SQL. So when we use AppWizard, a lot of the times we actually need to make use of a cursor. Now the purpose of a cursor is to do updates on a database record by record by record. Now there's many instances when it is necessary. So if I want to create or select a value and I want to actually return it as a comma delimited list, that means I need to get each record and at each instance added into my string. So I need to build my string record by record. Another reason why I would want a cursor is if I want to take apart or parse every record in a database. So I will have a table with values in it from a bulk insert, and I want to actually take apart each of those separately to give me a value. Other times that we might want to do this is if we need to build some HTML code in my stored procedure for a bunch of records, and each record needs to be a separate piece of HTML. And it's not always easy to do that in an SQL statement, so I want to do some processing in the SQL base or when I build my HTML code. So if I want to build a string, that's quite fancy. So a cursor consists of three parts. The first part is I have to declare it. The second part is I am processing the data. And the second part is I need to close it. Okay, I need to get rid of it. The reason for that is when I declare a cursor and I open it, in my temp database, in my the SQL creates whatever my select statement was, creates a temp table containing those values. And it gives it a specific name. So if I work with it, and I am done with it and I want to work with it again, it's still there, I can still access it. But if somebody else wants to work with it, it's already there. So when the stored procedure gets called again, that data is still there. So somehow I need to tell SQL I'm done with it so I can get rid of that temp table. Now cursor temp tables go further than just the stored procedure. So where normally if I create a temp table within a stored procedure, when the stored procedure finishes, the temp table gets dropped automatically. A cursor lives after the stored procedure. So I need to explicitly kill it at the end of it. So that's the closing process. Okay, so let's go through the three steps quickly. So when I declare a stored procedure, there's a very specific, or declare a cursor, there's a very specific syntax to use. So I will declare, and I'll have a name for it, but now it doesn't have an @ before it because it's not a parameter. So I will call it my cursor, and that's normal so far, and then I need to give it a type. Now in a cursor's case, the type is cursor. So not a varchar or anything, the type is cursor. Now, you can't just say I'm declaring a cursor, you need to say what this cursor is going to be. There must be some sort of select statement or SQL statement that is going to return the value for me for that cursor. Now, that can be a stored procedure if you want to, but in normal we don't use a stored procedure, we just use a normal select. So to specify that, I need to say for. So I need to create my cursor for, and then I'll have my select statement of sorts from my table with my wheres and my joins and whatever. You can do whatever you can do in SQL statement, you can do in here. Subqueries, doesn't matter. The trick to this one is you need to be very specific as to which fields you are bringing back. And we will do that when we do the processing. See why when we do the processing. So you need to specify which fields you want in there. Generally, it's bad practice to use a star. The reason for that is if somebody later on goes and adds an extra field to your table, you need to update the processing to include that table. So we generally don't use a star when we do a cursor select. We specify specific fields. You can also have process fields in here, and you don't have to give them a name. So I can here say F1 times F5 if I want to. Doesn't matter, so I can have results here. I can concatenate a bunch of fields to create a string in here if I want to, as long as each value is specified. After this, I will say open my cursor. No, sorry, not my, it will be my cursor. Okay, so I will open my cursor. And that is the initialization part of this cursor. So every cursor looks like that. When you start it off, it basically looks like that. So I will then basically say, I create my cursor or declare my cursor. It's a cursor for this select statement with specified fields that it's going to return. And then I open my cursor. At the point where I open my cursor, SQL will take a snapshot of this data and store it in my temp table. If something happens with this data while I'm busy processing it, it will not pick it up. If I update fields while I'm processing it, it will not change the values in this. It basically took a snapshot of this into the temp table and it's working with that data. So that is the initialization code. So before I'm going to do the processing code, I'm just going to quickly go through the closing code. So after I've done my processing, I've got two things that I need to do to close my cursor. First thing is obvious. Close my cursor. And then, so that will say, okay, I'm just going to stop working with the data. The problem is that temp table still exists. So to get rid of that temp table, I need to say deallocate my cursor. Okay. So what this will do is that will close the data so I can't work with it anymore, and that will release the temp table. It will basically drop the temp table for the cursor and get rid of it on the other side. So this is my closing instruction. So I've got my declare for my cursor, I've got my open cursor, I've got my processing, and then I've got my closing and deallocation when I'm done with it. Okay, so that is the core function of it, the outside of it. Okay, now the processing of a cursor. Now what we have to realize is that to get the next record of a cursor, we have to fetch it. Okay, so this is the basic instruction. We're going to say fetch the next values from my cursor into. Now for every field that I specified when I built my select statement, I now need to have a variable in here. Okay, so that's why I said star is a bad idea, because now I won't have a field for that. So every field in my select statement, I've got 3 there, I need to have a variable in there. Now an interesting point to note is that if there's an inherent cost for it, so let's say for instance I've got an integer field there, but I've got a varchar value over here, and an inherent cost exists, so it can inherently cost an integer to a varchar, this value will pick up the integer value. Just take care that when you use dates or when you pass values the other way around, so if you've got a string and you want to put it in an int, if there's an error, you will receive an error on that record and it will stop working. So be careful with your types. Rather do a cast or some sort of compare before you do it to make sure that you get it into the right format. Okay, so that's the first instruction. Now I get the next value, so I get it into these variables. So what the cursor is going to do, whichever record it's on, it's going to put the field values for that select, for that specific record, into my variables. Now, a cursor will continue carrying on forever unless I find out if it's done now. So after the fetch statement, immediately after the fetch statement, I need to check, did it actually give me a value? So if it's past the end of my table, it's going to give me an error message to say, not an error message, but it's going to give me an error code to say that I am now done. I have no more records to give you. So what we will do is we will check for the internal status variable at fetch underscore status. This variable, if you call it directly after the fetch process, fetch instruction will give you the status of the fetch. Now, if it was successful and it got the next record, the value is 0. So if it's not 0, that means I don't want it anymore. I'm done, I've gone through, I've done all my bits. Okay, and we'll get to what's going to happen just now. So, what most people do in a stored procedure or in a cursor is they have one of these, and then they have got a while on their fetch status. So check that the fetch status is working fine, and then they've got another fetch at the end of the while statement to say, okay, so I'm fetching something. If it is fine, I'm going to do what I need to do, fetch the next one, come back, if it is fine, and carry on like that. I prefer not to do it like that. I prefer to put this entire thing in a while. So what I'll do is I'll say while 1 equals 1. Very dangerous select because it's always true. But in this case it works fine. And my while's going to end there. And when then I say if my fetch status is not 0, I will break. And break basically means break out of my while. So it's basically going to say my while is always running, so I'm always going to run. I'm going to fetch the next one until the next one isn't there anymore. And then I'm going to break out of it. And then at this point here, I do whatever I want to with my add variables. Insert, update, change, whatever I need to do with it over here, because I've got it line by line. So this is the inside, so over there I'll declare, I'll open, I'll do my while, fetch it into my variables. Remember to declare these before you use them. If my fetch status is not 0, I'll break out of it. Do whatever I need to do. It will repeat that for every record in my select at the moment, and then I'll close it and deallocate it. And that is the basics of a cursor.